All right, we're ready to start with our next panel discussion on public goods. 次は公共財に対するパネルディスカッションを始めたいと思います。So we have four great experts on the topic. Will be moderating the panel. Maybe you can introduce yourself and everyone else on the panel. Let's give a big hand to the panelists.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody, / afternoon. Thank you for EDCON for having us. My name is Will Wheeler. I'm the co-founder of Nouns Cares. I'll be the moderator for today's panel. We're going to collectively discuss our experiences in Nouns DAO, using crypto economics to create community and grow an open source brand. I am joined by three incredible individuals, builders and human beings today, who not only have respective expertise in what we're going to dive into together, but proof of work and on-chain impact and active community involvement to back it up. So thank you guys. Azim, Chris, Frankie, welcome. Long time no see.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Let's start with a brief round of introductions, both personally, professionally, and nounish. Not necessarily in that order, whatever we make it want to flow. Go for it. Chris, how about you?
I'm Chris Corella. I'm head of product at Charmverse. I'm a member of the Optimism Citizens House, and I'm Noun 839. A lot of my interest in this space is in supporting builders, grants programs, and public goods.
I'm Azim Khan. I'm the founder of an L2 called Morph. Prior to this, I was at Gitcoin, which is a DAO very well known for public goods. I'm delegated a Noun. I'm on the council for Octant, which is about giving public good grants to builders in the ecosystem. I'm still on the council with Gitcoin that helps distribute public goods funding to projects in the ecosystem. I'm a consultant with the UNICEF Crypto Fund, which in its own way is public goods, and then also help Mercy Corps' Ventures division, which focuses a lot on Web3. They're an NGO, so again, sort of public goods. Very happy to be here.
Hello, my name is Frankie. I'm Noun 1193. Will is my partner on the agency side. We've been in business together for about 15 years, have serviced brands from OpenSea to Nike to Amazon in an agency setting. We've been building out Nouns Cares to kind of move the brand along. And yeah, happy to be here. Excited to dive in.
Thanks, you guys. So we're all a part of Nouns. We've all entered the Nouns ecosystem at various times and have collaborated in different ways, have different focuses moving throughout the ecosystem. Before we get into that, to each of you, what is Nouns, if you had to explain it?
Nouns is a DAO. It's an on-chain organization where an NFT is auctioned off every 24 hours. 100% of the proceeds from that NFT auction goes into a shared treasury. That shared treasury can only be unlocked via proposals. And what we tend to do with that treasury is provide public goods grants, creative grants, anything that proliferates the name of Nouns. And it all happens through putting a proposal on chain and then having the membership, the NFT holders, vote to approve or not approve. That's the sort of technical definition of it.
I think from a technical perspective, I couldn't do better than Chris just did. I see it as just an online cool group collective of people who've been fortunate enough to hold these NFTs that allow them to vote on using the treasury to do cool things for the world. And it's why it's such an honor to be able to do it.
Yeah, and from our perspective, we think Nouns is one of the best vessels to bring more of a traditional consumer on chain. You know, we constantly make this reference that Nouns could be the Nike of Web3. Visually speaking, we think Nouns does a really good job at, you know, educating and onboarding the traditional customer or partner or, you know, brand in a way that might seem a little bit more familiar. Obviously, there's a lot of technicalities in this industry. So for us, Nouns has been a really good onboarding tool for folks who can relate to the visual identity of the brand. We, you know, from our side of things, feel like there's a lot of potential to take a more traditional approach to bring people on chain and not overcomplicate it. And we really believe that Nouns does that in a really good way.
Can you know, one or all of you, depending on how generous you're feeling, talk a bit about the governance structure of Nouns, a little bit more about that, and if you've been actively involved in governance, and if so, for how long?
I have been involved since almost the beginning, first through a sub-DAO called Shark DAO, which was like thousands of people came together and donated a small amount of ETH so that we could afford a noun, and then we governed that noun together. And that was really interesting because we would vote as a sub-DAO on what our vote would be for the main DAO. And so that's how I started. Governance really is, maybe if I think about just the technical angle of it, you need to have a noun to put a proposal on chain, or you need someone with a noun to sponsor your proposal on chain. So anything goes, any idea you have, nonprofit, commercial, events, activations, all of that goes. But you need to get someone in the community excited about it so they would sponsor your prop. And then once they sponsor the prop, there's a bunch of discussion that happens, and you can join a bunch of community calls if you want. You can use Warpcast to talk about your plans. But at the end, we vote. And we have a notion of dynamic quorum. So you could think at its most basic level, you want to you win 51-49. But we have this dynamic quorum where everyone who votes no. So 51-49 does pass a prop. But you need to hit some quorum level, maybe out of the box, you need at least 50 yes votes. But then every time you give a no vote, the quorum raises. And so the more contentious props require more participation from governance. Like every DAO, governance can be low. Sometimes you're having 25 people vote on these things, even though there's that many hundreds in the DAO. But then when it's controversial, we make the quorum much higher so that the will of the DAO gets activated.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we kind of love the transparency of it all. I think the governance structure is pretty amazing. You wouldn't see it in a traditional business setting, but you would definitely see it in a global setting. I think we're all familiar with governance, and for us, like I like that idea. I like the idea of seeing people's collective interests bring something to life. But yeah, like Chris said, I think there's a really solid opportunity for that to be the baseline of how we do things.
I would just add that it's incredibly decentralized, like maybe the most decentralized organization I'm a part of in this decentralized space. And a lot of the feedback you get when you vote, you can vote with reason. Everything's on chain. Everything about nouns is on chain, but you vote on chain with reason. And a lot of trying to figure out what the consensus of the organization is just seeing people's votes and why they voted yes or why they voted no. Every new member joins, changes the vibe a little bit. And so the consensus of what the DAO does changes every day.
What I like about it is that it's a unique form of both direct and representative democracy, and so there are people who hold nouns themselves that get a chance to be able to vote, but then there are people like me who have been trusted by the community to be able to vote on the behalf of others and to be able to look at the proposals that are put up so that we can find a way to pass what makes sense to further sort of the overall goals of what we think the ecosystem needs.
Beautiful. Thank you for all that. All right, let's establish a baseline here for the discussion, right? So let's talk a bit about public goods, network goods, and Creative Commons Zero, or CC0 as we're going to call it. Let's talk about these each in the context of nouns. Let's start with public goods. What are some of the earliest experiments and props in terms of public goods? What are some that come to mind in terms of season 1 through the current season of nouns?
Yeah, I'll talk about the early ones and then kick you guys over to your favorites. The very first prop was to donate to 5 different nonprofits that ranged from Save the Coral Reef, again, because Shark DAO was really interested in the oceans, and from that to Tor, because we were interested in internet privacy, and there's been lots of, maybe Azim will talk about some of the efforts we have for donating to Ethereum efforts. The other one that I like from the early days was just to give free eye exams and glasses to kids. It was a very successful project. I think it was somewhere in the magnitude of 10 to 15 ETH, and that was a lot more money back then. And we just gave eye exams and glasses to hundreds of kids who otherwise didn't have access to that, and it was really successful. And there was a second prop, a much larger one, and then we were able to do thousands of kids. And then it won various numbers of NGO awards for the good work.
My favorite was one that Gitcoin, when I was there, we collaborated with Zora and Nouns DAO. So Gitcoin, if you're not familiar, is an org that since 2017 has been distributing grants to people within the Ethereum ecosystem. To date, they've distributed over $60 million. And if you look at grantees that have gone on to be successful in various forms, whether it's launching tokens or private valuations. Last I had looked, Gitcoin had helped generate over $29 billion in global financial impact. We would run grants rounds on a quarterly basis, and we would raise money for each of those rounds. So Ethereum infrastructure, decentralized science, Web3 climate solutions, and one of those that we'd been doing was around regulatory advocacy. And so the Coin Center, Blockchain Association, DeFi Education Fund, EUCI for what's going on in the European Union, and we would help fund the organizations that are trying to help push the needs of the crypto community at large. And so it was around April of last year, I believe, when Coinbase came to us and said that they wanted to help make a regulatory education round happen. So it was a much more curated round of organizations. And what we were going to do to help actually fund this round, instead of us raising money from specific people, was that we were going to launch an NFT shield. And it was the birth of the Stand With Crypto movement, which, if any of you are familiar, exists today as a 501c4. And so we were minting these shields in collaboration with Zora, and Zora was donating $1 per NFT. To date, I believe somewhere between 200 and 250,000 of those have been minted, and we were able to donate over 6 figures to these organizations doing policymaker education efforts. And Nouns DAO ended up liking what we were doing so much that they put up a prop that passed to give $100,000 extra for Gitcoin to run one of these in the future. It's interesting when looking at the regulatory landscape, it would be contentious to say it is or isn't public goods. That's one of the things we can talk about, what exactly is a public good. But being in the position where these organizations are able to come and collaborate so that we can fund the people that are trying to push the efforts in a positive way internationally for us is something that's super important. And from all of the props that I've seen, while to many might be considered one of the more boring ones, is one of the ones that I find to be completely amazing.
Yeah, and for us, Will and I having more of like the traditional brand agency background, being able to move Nouns along as a brand and do good, between work that we're doing with Nouns Shelter, Nouns DAO Africa, there's really good opportunity to kind of onboard people through Web3 using the brand and allowing people to go out into the world and use that brand. For us, Nouns is a very welcoming brand in that sense, and we've really seen it kind of transcend what the education might be for somebody who's unfamiliar with Web3 and Web3 building, and focus more on the iconography of Nouns to get that done a little bit quicker. So when we talk about CC0, like lending our brand, having it available, there's always a great opportunity to kind of come in with the cuteness of the noggles and let that kind of steer the ship to the technology piece, which might be a little bit harder for some to understand.
Cool. And then, yeah, that was a great explanation, overview. Those are all amazing projects. In terms of network goods, maybe Chris, this is one that's good for you.
Yeah, network goods is my thing. I think the term public goods is very controversial. Certainly, every time Optimism runs a public goods around, there's like, Twitter shit posts all about it. And so a lot of what we actually do in this space in general, I believe, are network goods. They provide value to the network. And so Nouns does a bunch of everything. We build schools in Uganda. That is clearly a public good. It is like a real world manifestation of public good. And then a lot of the stuff we do for Ethereum, which I think is more of a network good, where we are funding things that benefit everyone on the Ethereum network, from the validators to the end users. And then Nouns itself also funds stuff that is good for Nouns. And so we talk about the virtuous flywheel, which is we sell a Noun at auction that fills up our treasury. We do cool shit with that treasury. It makes more people want to join Nouns, and we have this virtuous flywheel. And so sometimes we just straight up fund things that make Nouns look cool, so that we can get more interest and then do more public goods work.
This is where the contention of like the whole public goods thing comes from. So my understanding, or like the core definition of public goods, is supposed to be something that's non-rivalrous and non-exclusionary. And so you would think of clean air, libraries, clean water, roads, tunnels, bridges as things that sort of everyone can use and doesn't really compete with anyone for having, right? And so when I think about public goods, it's thinking about how when we look at what Web 2 has become, whether or not we realize it, we've sort of accepted that there are a handful of companies that sort of run absolutely everything. And the way that Web3 believes that we can reimagine the world is in a way that all of those kinds of things, whether it's social media, it's finance, it's search engines, can be done in an open source fashion in a way that everyone would be able to own those things. And so launching companies that we can look at and say they are, in a sense, public goods because anyone would be able to have access to them in the same ways and anyone can use them without it being competing is something that I find to be very important as we move forward. And so while it does end up benefiting the network that those things are being built on, at the same time, it's technically a network for everyone the same way that using, you know, the Brooklyn Bridge, I'm from New York, would be considered a public good.
Yeah, and at the same time making sure that the kind of traditional strategies and the upkeep of doing that is healthy, right, and educational. I mean, for us, like talking to more traditional brand partners like Adobe, Michelin, to kind of push the Nouns mission along and being ahead of kind of what I would like to consider like the news versus newspaper versus internet. I think, you know, between Ethereum and a lot of what Nouns is doing, we're ahead of the curve on that. So being able to actually be in front of the kind of ideologies and the technology that comes along with what we're doing, you have kind of a front seat, obviously, to be the meat shield and get hit pretty hard in the chest, but at the same time to be first, which I think is really, really important. And the priority around brand with the kind of back end of the technology, I think is what Nouns does really, really well. So for us, like having these conversations that are less intimidating with Web2 brands to onboard them to what we're doing is a big priority for us this year, and, you know, making that kind of the bigger focus with how we see network goods.
Mm-hmm. It's a good segue to CC0. I think it's a misunderstood thing. It's another abstract concept, even though it's very straightforward in definition. What is CC0? What are the sort of criteria and guardrails for it? For everyone who's not as familiar with it, we can start with you, Chris.
So CC0 is Creative Commons 0. It's a license primarily for content that has probably existed for close to 20 years now. And it is really kind of open source content. And so all of Noun's art assets are CC0, which means you can use it permissionlessly. You don't have to give attribution. You can just use it to do whatever you want. And as a result, lots of people create Namish art. Lots of people create Namish products. And no one needs the permission of the DAO to do so. There are no legal agreements to be signed. It is just open source art assets.
I can't do better than that.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that.
So aside from Nouns, are there any other great examples of kind of like some frictionless collaboration and use cases for CC0 that come to mind?
Steamboat Willie.
Mm-hmm.
On the crypto side, there was Opopen, which was an NFT project that anyone could remix, and it was totally super successful, and lots of remixes were made. And what was great about it is it was really popular within the artist community, and they would remix it and they would sell it. And so everyone kind of in the community was using the core assets and then being rewarded for their work. So Opopen was a good one in the crypto space. Unsplash in the Web2 side of things has a lot of CC0 content. And so there's just a lot of stuff. You can go to Unsplash, grab that image, use it for your business, use it for your slides. That's maybe the most successful kind of Web2 use case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that, Frankie, you just sort of crossed the bridge there on that. I mean, let's talk about CC0 versus public domain or PDM, right? They're often commonly confused, but they're sort of like, you know, stepbrothers of one another. Any that come to mind there in terms of, I mean, Wikimedia Commons would be one that we all know, right? Any other sort of PDM or the difference between CC0 in terms of, you know, how you sort of wrangle that?
I mean, I think a lot of the old writing is public domain. I think like Jane Austen's work is public domain, which is why someone created Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. So I think, you know, Disney builds their whole movie base on stories that are hundreds of years old and now in public domain. So I think, yeah, there's a long history of success of people building on top of public domain work.
Mm-hmm. So for Nouns, you know, why is CC0 a superpower for Nouns? What does it enable? You know, what strengths does it bring to the table in terms of a decentralized environment?
Well, I mean, for one, I think, you know, especially being here, the technicalities that come with building on chain really intimidate a lot of people. And, you know, at the same time, there are brands that are doing the kind of commercial side of this better than others. I think Nouns is one of the better bridges and the softer, you know, landing pads for getting a better opportunity for brands to collaborate and come in, right? Like Nouns doesn't seem intimidating, pretty much all the way through for some until you get to the very end, right? But even there, I think we're cushioning the blow in a way that, can, onboard, Web 2 brands like we're seeing, and some of the partnerships that we have coming up really lend to that. I think that, you still need the traditional marketing, you still need the traditional strategy, and you still need the traditional onboarding. While all of this is great, and, we're obviously all trying to move toward a greater good, there still needs to be some sort of intro class that comes with something that doesn't feel so intimidating on the onset.
I kind of have two angles here, which is one, if you come down to the second floor where we have our little Nouns booth, you'll see lots of products created in the name of Nouns with the noggles or, figures of the actual Nouns themselves. Those are just all created by individuals who didn't need permission, didn't need to get a prop passed. So on one hand, it allows us to have tons of different assets and products and things, and anyone can use it, and people can monetize it so that there's financial incentives for them to use the Nouns art. So that's on one side, which like we have incredible parallel execution of people just doing cool things without asking anyone for it, totally permissionless. My second point is we onboard so many artists into the space because it's so easy to work with the Nouns art. It's really cool. Lots of artists come in. We have various small grants programs. A popular one on Farcaster is rounds.wtf, and we run many rounds for people to just make Nouns animations or to make Nouns sketches. And then the way that works is the more likes a post gets from Nouns, the more you get rewarded. And so I met an artist here who recently onboarded to Nouns and says he makes more money doing Nounish animations and getting rewarded in the small grants than he does in his day job. So we're able to bring people in both because of the creative and the interest, and then actually reward them for the work they do.
You sort of just touched on sort of the relationship between CC0 in terms of liberating crypto economics and also the other way around. Do you feel like it's really that crypto economics, provide the infrastructure that allows CC0 to sort of exist and be free-flowing environment for Nouns?
Yeah, I think so. For us, and again, it's not going to work for everybody, right? Nouns is very much not just considering giving their brand away, right? There's a lot in the background that makes that our best foot forward. And, again, it does really open up the conversation to say, hey, go use it, come back if you like it, and we'll, try again or do it better. But yeah, I think, a lot of the kind of behind the noggles almost is what we do after that, right? After you go out, after you're in the world, after you're using artwork or the characters or whatever, you can come back and say, man, that was a great experience. Let's go bigger, let's go further. And at the same time, we're able to build on top of that, but also proliferate through the folks that are out in their world, promoting Nouns the way they see fit.
Yeah, I just think even beyond CC0, crypto economics are an important part of building community because you have some skin in the game, you get rewarded. There's some reason to participate. And if a bunch of people can come together and donate money, even if it's a small amount of money because we want to rent a recording studio for a Friday night, that can be done through crypto in ways that is very hard to be done through the banking system or Venmo. So allowing the internet, or if you're a subreddit at crypto economics, it would be the most impactful place on the internet. But unfortunately, there's a bunch of people who believe in saving the ocean but have no way to do it.
Yep. That was great. So I think superpowers established, right, in terms of CC0 being liberating, keeping things free-flowing and onboarding, and no one centralized person to approve things, right? It's also a double-edged sword. What are the sort of downsides there? And by all means, be emotionally honest about this because it manifests in different ways, whether you're doing a prop, whether you're interacting with a brand or doing a partnership. And what does that sort of look like to you?
So this steps away from CC0 for me, but when I was at Gitcoin, I did deals where we collaborated with UNICEF, with Shell Oil, and with the American Cancer Society. And even as what was considered a true DAO, one of the most difficult things about getting any of those deals to happen was when it came to the attorneys on the side of those companies sitting down trying to understand how they could sign paperwork with a company that had no end owner. And so there was no one that you would be able to technically hold accountable for anything that could or might go wrong. And so when we worked with Shell Oil, for instance, they donated $500,000 to us that we were supposed to distribute, or did distribute, to grantees working on Web3 climate solutions. But for the 10 months that it took us to actually get that deal through the finish line, they absolutely spent more than $500,000 on just legal fees. There were phone calls continuously where they would have 13 lawyers on the call and thinking about the kinds of attorneys they have and what those per hour rates are. And that has been one of the things, at least, that I've seen continually ends up being difficult, is that looking at the idea of there being no actual owner who signs off on things. And so I would say into this, it's a similar major downside for being able to collaborate with non-Web3 organizations who just don't understand what that means.
Yeah, and for Will and I, to that point, you know, we came in with the agency experience looking to kind of, you know, support some of that, right? Even with the internal sub-DAOs, you know, looking to support them for the best opportunity for success. You know, I love the idea of having somebody to blame, you know, within Nouns, and really assuming some of those positions, or at least supporting the projects internally that make sure that that stuff doesn't fall through the cracks, right? Like being able to teach a DAO or a prop that launches how to write a prop, or, you know, best support a partner of those scales is a really important piece of the DAO for us. So making sure that everybody has the best opportunity to obviously succeed, but also help carry the torch through the dark with them, and make sure that there is prop success, there is individual success, but, you know, like anything else, and if you're familiar with the history of Nouns, you'll know that at certain points there's breaks in the bridge. But again, you know, with every break in the bridge, there's a new opportunity to fix and provide structure. So as we go, you know, you'll see people come, you'll see people go, you'll see people excited, you'll see people frustrated, but ultimately, you know, what you get out of every engagement is a new opportunity to learn, and that's kind of what we love about it being so open-ended and so visible to the world at large.
And then I'll just bring it back to CC0, is you then have no control of your brand. And so there's low quality stuff that happens. There are, you know, just copycat DAOs that don't even try to change the art. Some of them turn out to be high quality DAOs, some of them not. There are scams, you know. There was we do have a kind of an innovative token, but before that, people would just launch a token named Nouns, and there's no recourse. There's certainly no legal recourse, you know. What we don't have in Nouns is like the exploitative part of it, but, you know, if you're familiar with like an MIT software license, which has many positives until Amazon takes it and builds web services and doesn't put money back into the community, and then you wind up with like open source developers trying to figure out how to get paid. So I think I'd say my three things are like low quality content can exist, scams are straight up hard to stop, and then there is the potential for it to just be totally exploitative, where people take your work and resell it and don't give back to the community.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's one that's just kind of Wild West in terms of, but the community's at the same time very self-policing and pretty good about calling stuff out, which is interesting. The DAO does get behind things and identify, you know, bad actors and things like that. You touched on this, Azim, and then Frankie, I'll ask you. Why is it hard for brands to work with CC0 projects, not just DAOs, but let's talk about DAOs, right? What are some of like the pain points in terms of having that conversation, walking through a project, talking about accountability, meeting one-on-one with a brand creative director and saying, here's our stuff, you know, and this is how it should look and feel?
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to both sides, right? Like, I think it's who you meet when you get there, right? The concierge service within Nouns doesn't really exist. So, you know, I don't think it's necessarily hard. I just don't think that the structure had ever been there for that. And look, like, it may not be all contracts, paperwork, and understanding, but there is an opportunity, as we've seen and as we hope to roll out in the next couple months, opportunities for brands to understand, but they need a point of delivery and understanding, and, you know, just putting people in those positions to do so, right? Like, Nouns has immense talent, but even corralling them to execute on corporate partnerships, you know, as small as a flyer all the way up to a web build is kind of the structure that needs to come from building on a system like this. So as time goes, I feel like it'll all get tighter and people will be showing up for the right reasons. But as Chris said, you'll have a lot of those hiccups and those moments in time where it sets us, one step back, two steps forward, hopefully in most cases, but still is a good opportunity for the public to look at, this industry, this technology and say, well, not yet because of these reasons. I hope for a world that all of this is open source and available, looking at projects like even Blender and how communities come together to build, but have that still provide like a very traditional Web 2 experience to where, again, there's no money being traded or transacted, makes those things a little bit easier, right? So for us, it's about getting tighter and I think more, management heavy in the areas that do need a little bit more hand-holding, and then allowing for the brands that come in to feel comfortable with the people they're interfacing with, which, you're going to look for in a Web 2 setting just as much in a Web 3 setting.
Yeah, my side has been different on like trying to do the BD and sales side of trying to get these companies to agree. And one of the biggest things that I've seen is at the end of the day, when you're any organization, whether it's a nonprofit, NGO, or for-profit company that has been very successful over the years, risk mitigation for your brand is of the utmost importance. And when you're in a position that you don't exactly know what risk mitigation looks like, because this is so much so the Wild West, and we've seen so many terrible stories of what has gone on and almost see them on a constant basis of things that go very, very wrong in this space. I've found that behind closed doors, it's one of the most difficult things for them to accept is they're extremely excited. All of the people around want to actually do something. But then when you get to that part where you're supposed to sign the paperwork, it ends up becoming way more laborious and tedious.
And then I'll just add that the world has caught up to open source, but it wasn't that long ago where companies refused to use open source or like refused to let their developers immigrate open source code. That was not that long ago. It's kind of crazy to think about building software without open source now. CC0 is almost at that moment, which is, many of the brands I've interacted with are excited, and then it gets to some lawyer, and they say, what do you mean this is CC0? What does that mean for our brand? And I see a lot of that old, well, we can't touch this because it's communist open source branding. So we're like on the CC, and there has not been a ton of CC0 success. Certainly Nouns is one. We're starting to see more of it, but I think from a mindset perspective, lawyers have not thought about open source content and open source branding yet, and that becomes a point of friction.
Yeah, all of this is very much in contrast to an experience that I had a few years ago when I was working at a company named Aglet. It was like Pokemon Go for sneakerheads game. And so you would be able to collect digital sneakers in the form of skins that could then earn in-game currency. And when we first launched the game in March of 2020, right when COVID happened, it was wildly successful. We hit six figures very quickly. And 70% of the shoes that we were distributing, whether for free or for money, were Nike sneakers. And it was not long after that Nike was able to come to us, send us a cease and desist, and had done many, many pages of review on what it was we were doing wrong, why it was that what we were doing was wrong, and the things that they would do if we didn't stop. And so that is the way that companies are very accustomed to being able to deal with things, as opposed to in the way that Chris is talking about in a CC0 way, is if Nike were to want to collaborate. And I still love Nike as I'm wearing them on stage here, but would love for them to be willing to, and other orgs to be willing to, but I also understand sort of their hesitations.
Yeah, and at the same time, like, we're moving toward a world where it's going to be very hard to catch everything that falls into these pockets, right? Like, we look at AI, we look at deepfake, we look at a lot of the stuff that, bootlegging has been a problem in that industry for quite some time, and you can put all the red tape around it that you want, but in a lot of ways, I think what CC0 does well, and, as we move toward this direction, is open up the floor for us to find solutions that, are unavoidable, right? Like, you're not going to be able to maintain this balancing act forever. And as we kind of move forward in a world where building is a priority, we're seeing that, especially in our industry, people are kind of taking a back seat toward the process more and allowing for things to kind of flow organically. Our experience, especially with a lot of our Web 2 clients, as they look at this space is, well, let's kind of hear how we would go at this and then kind of make a call or a decision. But definitely, especially after last cycle, we're seeing a lot more interest to try and play in this space and to try and, understand it more, because, again, I think we all know, and I think the internet has told us that we're obviously moving in this direction, whether we like it or not. So.
Do you think that IRL kind of creates the perfect conditions for, especially nouns, right? Nouns sort of acts like an established IP. The sort of creative class of the DAOs have sort of risen to the top and take a lot of initiative and are very active in providing physical goods, design services, all sorts of creative support for projects. How important is IRL in terms of establishing that sort of relationship with the brand and bring them to an environment like we have downstairs to be able to do that in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, massively important, right? Like the opportunity to educate and show real use cases and do retail and get artists to make money and not have to wait for an invoice and a process that might be a little bit more herring, right? We definitely see, especially from our side, like opportunities to make this pretty much very familiar in a way that might be, again, a retail setting, a gallery setting for people to understand how this stuff can work. And putting the crypto, the transaction, the Web3, the tokenomics all the way in the back, right? I think Nouns does a really good job at that. And again, like I think some of the best education for even us, right, Will, has been like coming there, feeling it, touching it. So I think IRL is massively important to the future of how we educate and onboard.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the fact that all of us flew from very different parts of the world to be here. And I think it's funny that crypto has this idea that they think because the tech can create decentralization, that we can take a lot of humans out of what needs to be part of things. But the reality is that to a certain degree, you can't remove the humans, and that IRL, real in touch feeling side of things is completely necessary.
Yeah, I just think IRL creates strong network effects, whether it's internally, now we're meeting other members of the DAO, and so we have a stronger internal network. And externally, when you first encounter a meme, like Nouns on the internet, it's a meme. But when you encounter the people behind it, I think it's much more impactful, and you understand how real they are, how passionate they are about Nouns, how thoughtful they are about crypto.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I asked the question. Before we jump to some Q&A, we have a little bit of time left, I think. Any sort of closing thoughts or comments you have on anything we discussed? I'm sure we'll have some interesting questions that might come through, but
please go down to the Nouns Cares spot on floor 2, check it out, buy things, come learn more. We would love to have many, many, many more people join to continue this fun experiment of Nouns.
I'll just close with like Nouns and CC0 is in a sense like art hyperstructure, and it is completely unstoppable. And Nouns kind of generates this flywheel with the treasury we have. But if we didn't have a treasury, people would still be doing stuff in the name of Nouns. And so, there's lots of CC0 projects that they die when they have no variety. And so there's a lot of work to there's a lot of activation energy to build a brand around CC0. But once you do, the treasury is the last thing that matters, because it's the passion of the people proliferating the brand, which will just happen forever.
Yeah, no, beautifully said. Yeah, for us, again, like the health of the DAO is really important, and we are deploying a lot of Web 2 thinking and traditional approaches to make this more of a less threatening experience for some of the bigger guys and some of the bigger brands. So, with Cares, which the booth, as Azim mentioned, is downstairs, a lot of our focus is that the education, the onboarding, the structure, and the strategy. So if you're interested in learning more about our backgrounds and the application that we hope to provide, would love to have you come on down and talk to us.
All right, one last thing, because we talked a bunch about CC0 and in-life experiences and brands and art. We also fund tons of software and open source software that is used by the world. We funded Agora, which is now the governance platform of Optimism and EMS. We funded Rounds, which is a popular crypto economic solution on Warpcast. Prop House is a small grants program before that. And so if there are software people in the crowd, I encourage you to check out Nouns. We love software. We love Ethereum. And, the door's open, and we want to fund cool stuff.
yeah, great point. I'll open the floor for any questions. Anybody has anything, feel free to raise your hand and we'll get it up here.
Go check out our esports team.
That too.
Any questions from anyone? ご質問のある方。Over there.
So I think there are two different ways. One is like start your group chat. Like everything starts as a squad in a group chat. It's a good point though. We have Nouns Japan, Nouns Africa. There is software called Builder Protocol. It's nouns.build. It allows anyone to start their own Nounish DAO. It's been popular use to build sub-DAOs and Nounish aligned DAOs. And so check out Builder Protocol, nouns.build. You can even just like deploy your own Nouns DAO on testnet and have some fun with it. But if you're interested in this model of governance, that's the place to start.
Yeah, and get on Warpcast. Find your people. You know, they're there for sure. And any one of us, if we can help at all, you know, we're more than happy to.
Anybody else? Any more questions? All right. In closing, how would folks go about getting involved with Nouns, aside from what we just talked about, and also what else is going on this week? I can help with that if you don't remember the days or times. Great. So we're doing workshops all day tomorrow at the Rose Conference Hall from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're also doing a screening of Shark Pickle Cone, which is a documentary about nouns that was produced and minted on chain. And then we're doing our official after party on Tuesday night. All of the information is on Luma, lu.ma/cares. You can also follow us on Farcaster for updates.
Yeah, and I'll just also restate, join Warpcast. We have a Nouns channel. There's a Nouns Amigos channel if you're in Latin America. There's a Nouns DAO Africa channel. There's a Nouns Japan channel. There's Nouns Animators if you're an animator. There's Nouns Sketching if you're an artist. So a lot of what we do is on Warpcast, and that's a good way to engage with the community online, but certainly come engage with us IRL.
Excellent.
And one more question. When's Super Smash Bros?
We also are inviting the top Melee player in Japan to come to the main event. And, oh, I see Dan in the back too there. And that's... There's a chance you can play against him, yep. And good luck beating him, but if you do, we've got prizes for you. And that'll be happening at the main event at Yoyogi on the 30th, so come on down. I believe we're getting started at 10 a.m.
What are the prizes if you can beat him?
A lot of the stuff we have in the booth, some bragging rights, of course. Probably a lot of good social content coming out, honestly, if you beat him.
And I will also make a one-of-one art piece for anybody who beats him.
Here first. Thank you all for the panel today. It was awesome. I enjoyed chatting with all of you, and thanks everyone for coming, and thank you, EDCON.
Yeah, thank you, Japan.
Thank you. Let's give a big hand.